wandering rainbow, leave a bit of color for my heart to hold. Stars in the sky,
John Hutchinson looks at the work of Irish painter James Arthur O'Connor in The Eye of the Artist. That follows 100 Great Paintings, which takes us to the Musée du Louvre, Paris.
This placid, but as we'll see, extraordinary scene, showing a civil servant, Nicolas Rolin, firmly planted in the company of the Queen of Heaven, was painted by Jan van Eyck in 1434. Van Eyck was a Burgundian, and Burgundy then comprised not only the fabulously rich wine-growing province of France, but much of modern Belgium and Holland. It included internationally famous centers of trade and industry like Brussels, Ghent, and Bruges, which was larger than London and more prosperous than Paris. Its Duke, Philip the Good, was the wealthiest ruler in Europe. He was also a generous patron of writers, as this illumination shows, and artists. He employed Jan van Eyck, paid him well, and valued his intelligence enough to send him on a number of diplomatic errands. So Jan was close to the mood and interests of the most glamorous court in the West, an educated and traveled man, an intellectual as well as a painter. The Duke's right-hand man in all affairs of state was his chancellor, Nicolas Rolin. Rolin was 58 when Jan brought him here, calculating, tough, very wealthy, loathed by those jealous of his influence, as intent on the courtly wheeling and dealing of the moment as on getting an equivalent position in the court of eternity, the errand which brings him here. But where is he? Has she, as in a vision, come down to him? Or has he, as in a meditation, gone up to her? They're in an airy but meticulously solid hall of state, and it is surely hers. Her throne is permanent, of inlaid marble. His prie-dieu is portable, carried with him in his thoughts. And the artist has anyway made it clear that such a room couldn't possibly have existed on Earth. That quadrifoil decoration at the base of the column is Gothic. But the arches springing from the top of the column are rounded, Romanesque, an earlier style. It's topsy-turvy. It's a clue to the sophisticated observer to adjust his eyes to the court of heaven. And it's very likely that while Jan was painting this scene, that he had one specific aspect of heaven in mind, the New Jerusalem, as described in the Bible and the revelation of St. John the Divine. There are tiny biblical scenes in the capitals. But the room is otherwise quite secular in its architecture. John wrote of the city, "I saw no temple therein." And John described it as having a wall great and high, and there it is, a battlemented parapet beyond a garden planted with the red roses of Christ's blood, and the white lilies of the Virgin's purity. Most unusually, both mother and child are shown with the attributes of political power. She is being crowned. He holds an orb. And his expression, as he blesses Rollin, has a somewhat unchildlike, "it's up to you" expression. In 1434, the Duke of Burgundy was eager to lead a crusade to free the earthly Jerusalem from the infidel, and thus extend the kingdom of Christ on earth. And it would be Rollin's job to organize Burgundy's part of this. So, prompted by the eager, imperial little boy, he's thinking of the enhanced chance of his getting up here permanently that a successful crusade would bring. In all this, Jan must have been following his patron's instructions. But the background of the painting was his. And the view beyond the Holy Trinity of arches, one of the most amazing ever painted, was his view of worship and salvation. Far below the parapet, the river divides a fortified city on the right from its suburb on the left. They're connected by a bridge defended by a tower. Tiny people, minuscule but sufficient nudges of the finest of brushes, cross the bridge. And more of them appear in the streets and square of the suburb. This, behind the brooding, very much of this world presence of Rollin, has only one church, perfectly practical, given the low density of the housing. The city, behind the Virgin, is in total contrast. The houses are swamped by churches. Thanks to the minute precision of Jan's brush, you can count 10 of them, culminating in the vast cathedral, though it's less than an inch high, next to her shoulder. In an earlier picture, Jan had shown the Virgin filling a church like a holy giantess, because she was as necessary to the efficacy of prayer as her son was to salvation. So the city is Jan's Virginopolis, his personal homage to the girl deity who must fill men's prayers before they can rise to heaven. Meanwhile, the boats discharge at the quayside or ply across the river. Such unnatural clarity in the description of individual things had something in common with the detailed profusion that was characteristic of Burgundian culture as a whole, from poems and chronicles to banquets and processions. And it also had the backing of a philosophy which taught that only individual objects were knowable. Generalizations and concepts, linking them into categories, might be true, but couldn't be proved. So the surest way of praising God aright was to reproduce, with the most loving exactitude, the objects he had created or enabled man to make. And this brings us to the two anonymous men at the painting's center. They look a bit like dwarfs, but it's clear that the standing man is of normal height because he's exactly the same height as the protective parapet. Standing up against the wall, he can't see the view. Perhaps he's actually blind. He seems quite young, yet he's holding a stick. He appears to be listening to his companion, who's leaning well forward to look down at the river. It can't be an accident that the exact center of this scrupulously thought-out work lies between the clump of virgin lilies and these unimpressive little figures. What's more, though our interest across the painting depends on the interplay between the massive, intent presence of Rollin and the Virgin and Child, our interest up into the picture is rushed up the unbroken row of tiles towards them. Is it too far-fetched to interpret the one who leans over the battlements of the New Jerusalem in order to see God's creation with all the freshness imparted to it by the Creator as the painter, and the one who can't see as representing those of us who must rely on an artist's eye to imagine both heaven and earth as they should be seen?